Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing 52 weeks of Python in 10-minute sessions. Today's topic is NAPALM configuration. That is functions that are available in NAPALM to compare configuration, to replace configuration, etc. We're going to look at comparing the existing configuration with a potential replacement candidate. And so let's get started. So NAPALM has this extra functionality that's interesting, dealing with configuration files and the ability to compare a configuration file from a device with something that has been stored and is presumably a standard version, so you can see if it has gotten out of sync or somebody's made changes or something like that. So that's what we're going to do, is look at that NAPALM functionality. But before we do that, I want to point something out. This code is written so that it can deal with multiple device types, but what I've found is that not only do I have a misbehaving device type still out in the sandbox, but this one right here, this iOS XR device, is causing there to be crashes within NAPALM config. And so I'm going to isolate everything to NXOS in this particular demonstration. If you look at my Connect module, you can see that I have commented out iOS XR. When I recorded the last session, which was on NAPALM in general, this device was not up. It has magically come back up out in the Cisco Always On Sandbox, and this one does work with the configuration compare, so that is what we're going to use. So let's breeze through this code at a high level and see what it does. So some of this should look familiar. You can ignore the for statement because, as I mentioned, in our connection, we are only connecting to the NXOS device for now. So we will be doing this for NXOS, and we are going to connect to the device, get our NAPALM device as you saw in our last lesson, and we're going to open that device. That's where we establish communication, login, etc. to the device. Once we have done that, what we're going to do is this code that you see right here. So depending on the device type, we are either going to get the running configuration, or if it's an NXOS SSH, which it is in this situation, then we are going to call an internal function called getCheckpointFile. Now what this is going to do is it's going to get us a file which represents the configuration of that device. It's going to give me a little blurt here with the little squiggly lines underneath that says I'm accessing a protected member. Yes, I know that I'm doing that, but I need to do that in order to do my comparison. And so what we're going to get is the actual configuration, which can be in the form of a string that I can then write out, and that's what this is going to be doing. So I'm going to open a file called cisco.devicetype.config, and I'm going to write it out, and this is what I'm writing out, the config for compare, which is what I got either from here or from here. Now when I write it out, you can see over here Cisco NXOS _SSH config. That matches this file name that I've got right here. My device type, as you can see, is NXOS SSH. And if I were to look at this, this is what my output file looks like. Now, I'm not an expert in configuration of Cisco devices, but one of the things that you'll notice is that this is in a handy kind of standard normalized form, which would allow for comparison. Here's all my SNMP stuff. Here's my VLAN stuff, etc. And so you can see that that's what my file actually looks like. That's what I get back. Now that I've done that, I can call to my function for my NAPALM device called load replace candidate. And what this is going to do is it's going to load my replacement candidate onto the device. And so what is the file name that I'm giving it? I'm giving it the file name, which is the file that we just looked at, that I just pulled down. So does this make sense from an operational point of view? No, it does not. I'm reading the checkpoint file and then I'm comparing it. The idea would be that my standard configuration would be what is saved in this file name that you see right here. But because I want to show that this actually works when I do the comparison, I am comparing it to the thing that I just pulled down. Now, if you wanted to modify this, what you could do is pull this down and then at a later point in time, like a day later, run it, but run it using the saved version. In other words, don't do this part, comment this stuff out. And then when you ran it, you would see probably that there will be differences because people are always making changes to that sandbox file. So you could do that. What I'm doing is I'm comparing it to exactly the thing that I just read in. I just read it in, and now I am doing my load replace candidate with exactly this same file name. Now, load replace candidate is not going to replace anything. It's just going to load the replacement candidate. And what I can then do is I can call this important function. That's the whole purpose of what we're looking at right here. It's so that I can compare the configuration. What this is going to do is it's going to go out to the NAPALM device and pull the configuration, probably internally using this functionality, and then it's going to compare it with this file that I just gave it. And so this file will have the stored configuration. As I mentioned, yes, I did just retrieve it and store it. If you want to comment these things out and run it a day later or make a change to that sandbox configuration on your own and then compare it and see what happens. But compare config is going to return for me something which is going to be the difference between those two configurations. And this will allow you to see, hey, has there been a change or not? And the normal operational way of doing this would be to have this stored version of the file. So I have the stored version of the file out there. I wouldn't be reading it in. I would have these things right here commented out, or they just wouldn't exist. So let's run it and see what happens. First thing we're going to do is connect to the device. So I'm connecting to this NXOS device. I've done that successfully. I'm getting the configuration. That's the get checkpoint configuration, and I'm writing it out. Now I'm loading the candidate config. That's the load replace candidate. And now I'm asking NAPALM to compare the configuration. And when it's done, I'm saying the diff is nothing. So I've done the diff of the output and there is no difference. And as I say, just as a reminder, if you are attempting to do this from something that you saved before, then what you need to do is comment all of these lines and then it will use something from before. In fact, why don't I just go ahead and run this. So as you can see, it has successfully run and found a no diff. Okay, so let's review what we talked about. First, we talked about the fact that we will only be using our NXOS SSH device in order to communicate for this NAPALM config example. When we connected to the device, once we had done that, we went out to the device and we said get checkpoint file. Notice there's an underscore there. If you're copying my code in some way, then don't forget that or look it up. We go and get the checkpoint file. It gets stored, our checkpoint file, and it looks something like this. It basically is sort of a normalized version of all of the configuration information. Once we have that, we write it out. Now, this is not the way that we would do it operationally, but I'm doing it for this example just to compare configuration against the current configuration. The NAPALM stuff that we do, besides reading the information, is we load the checkpoint candidate, which loads our candidate in, and then we can do compare config. That will compare the current existing configuration out on the device with our replacement candidate, and it will tell us the difference. And then we print the difference out. As you can see up here, our difference is nothing because we got the file and stored the configuration immediately before doing the comparison. If you were to wait after you have saved it and wait like a day or two or make sandbox changes yourself, then you would see diffs show up right here. That is compare configuration type stuff from NAPALM. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, let me know. And as always, thanks for listening.